Alright, so apologies for how late these next two videos are. My body has just been a whole load of crap lately, so if I also look like crap, I just look how I feel. So that's how I basically went into these next three, or five if we're talking about both these videos that are coming out together. But we're going to start with these three that just came out this past weekend, and we're going to start with Death on the Nile. And this was a movie that you could immediately chalk up to that whole thing of how necessary is this really, because we already have at least two adaptations of this that stand out already, with the 78 movie with Peter Ustinov and the David Suchet one, obviously. And but you know, it's there was something interesting, I thought, about the idea of this Poirot played by Branagh having like this almost, I don't know, like how much he plans on franchising this after these. I just know there was the lead in that doesn't quite line up continuity wise. As far as I can't remember what the exact line is at the end of his Murder on the Orient Express, but obviously it was a lead in to this, and there is something about what he, like his performance, particularly, and what he brings to it as a director, that just, because I'm just kind of a cheerleader for Branagh in general, and want him to succeed in whatever he's going to, unless it's like, Artemis Fowl or something, something that he clearly was just kind of thrown into, but here he reunites again with his cinematographer, who was just criminally snubbed for Belfast. But even before that, collaborated on him with the previous movie, his Murder on the Orient Express. And we start in a place that I was not expecting to start in. So I'm, familiar with Death on the Nile as it is, like as it stands. But as far as like the whole history of Poirot, that one is kind of, I'm not entirely sure of all the details on that and just how much backstory Christie has given him over all the different stories that he was in. So I don't know, like any of his backstory stuff that's in this, I don't know if that comes from other sources in the book series, or if this was just what the screenwriter came up with. But starting in this World War One area where we're in the trenches, and immediately, of course we got the black and white, which I had talked about looks so amazing in Belfast. And the cynic in me's first thought was, oh, Branagh just wanted an excuse to have his Paths of Glory shot. Like, that's really the purpose of this opening scene. But it does do something interesting where it really does put us in Poirot's perspective going into the story, more so than we've seen, I feel like, up to this point, at least cinematically. Where we do get this whole backstory. It sounds ridiculous when you say it, like, out loud, or when you're describing it. But the fact that when you first think of Poirot, the first thing you probably think of is the mustache, and how a weird amount of this movie is that mustache's origin story, I guess you could say, which is an interesting choice. But I mean, as far as like seeing him as a character, like this really three-dimensional character going into whatever the mystery is going to be, from that perspective, because like I was saying, it could sound ridiculous to say that, but the way it ties into his history and where he's coming from emotionally, and also seeing, like how he was able to use these skills that he has now as a detective in his youth, because for a movie that CGI is so consistently shoddy, the de-aging on him was actually done really well. So once we get that opening, then we don't quite come into Death on the Nile as we know it, because we do have the introductions to the characters where he's in like this jazz club and he's observing everybody, and we see all the characters that we know we're going to be seeing around later on the boat, and these are kind of their introductions a little bit. But obviously, our big introductions are of Armie Hammer and Gal Gadot, Simon and Lynette, and I mentioned Gal Gadot a few times recently about how she hasn't really found much of the charm or charisma that she had in the first Wonder Woman since that movie, and she's kind of one of the blandest people that is working right now. And it's like, and I was kind of afraid of coming in with a bias anyway, because the obviously the Lynette in the Suchet version is my favorite actress, so it was immediately going in like, Gal Gadot's never going to live up to this. It's like if Emily Blunt has played this character, everybody else might as well quit. But it's yeah. What I had talked about when I talked about the Suchet version was how Blunt's presence in that episode was basically just like she just had to sort of own the room when she walked into it without having to do a whole lot apart from that. And kind of just give you this vibe that she was this sort of either desirable creature to everybody in the room or the form, like envy in human form when you look at the way Jackie looks at her. And you can see immediately how all these things surrounding her would just kind of be coming down on her all at once, at times literally. And so that's really all I think Gal Gadot would have to do, is to just bring presence. Like, that's all I guess the role really requires at the end of the day. But I don't know, there's something about her and Armie Hammer. Not even going into, Armie Hammer's other obvious stuff going into this. It just feels like the whole time there's something missing, because when we see, well, first off, when we see Simon and Jackie dancing together, they might as well just be fucking in public with the way it's shot and the way it's choreographed and all that stuff. It is this nice sort of long take in how it's done, but once we get past that and you realize, like, the scene feels steamy despite just being a dance scene, that there should be something there, but then there's supposed to be something even stronger when Gal Gadot comes into the room. And she does have like a big grand entrance and everything that's really well shot, but then once, it's Gal Gadot and she's doing what she considers to be acting, you don't really see the big turning point that's going to set this whole story off, and have all these different things start coming into play. And it all just feels very bland as soon as the dialogue starts. And it's like the visuals Branagh has down, as long as it's not, CGI heavy like a lot of the later scenes are. But that's the issue. When the characters actually start interacting should be where, ensemble pieces like this, where the characters and their personalities play such a big part in the story itself, that should be when it really starts to take off, when the characters start interacting. And you actually kind of see that throughout the movie, even when they're on the boat, where we have all these characters with all these really talented actors, and it's like so much because when you look at, Murder on the Orient Express, everybody's in such close confinement and close quarters that naturally it's going to be much more of like a performance, like the performances are going to play much more of a part in it. Whereas Death on the Nile has always been something that is partially that, but also a lot devoted to the surroundings, the location and the scenery and stuff like that. So it's obviously stuff like this I feel like works a lot better when it's more performance focused, like something like Murder on the Orient Express has to be. Especially when you're gonna kind of essentially, I don't know if I want to say cutting corners. I don't know if I don't know the process. I wouldn't know if you could call it that, but the idea to basically animate nearly everything as far as location goes and backgrounds go. There's in particular, there's a snake that's shown quickly, that's just so obviously animated and so like jarring in how obvious the animation is. How it, like the usual complaint about bad CGI is it looks unfinished, which I guess you could say. With how much like this was delayed and stuff like that, you think they would go in and sort of touch this stuff up, but that doesn't seem to be the case. So in the meantime, obviously, since it's Death on the Nile, Death on the Nile has always had a sort of slow start where we get to know all the different characters, and then we have the scene where Lunetta's potentially almost assassinated, before we even get to the big moment that sets off the mystery itself. Even technically, the mystery starts when all the characters are here, because we know something's going to go wrong, and at least one of these characters is shady. But it feels like so little focus is on that and on character and performance that you don't really get that vibe as much with this one. It kind of feels like we're just killing time when we're getting the character intros, and we get a lot of grand entrances, and a lot of like long shots that show us around everything, show us the different characters just sort of interacting with each other and being themselves and showing us what our location is, where all the different rooms are. But you don't really get this sense that it's in preparation for something to really go down and for all this, like to really take in all this stuff, and that will help you as the story kind of unravels. It just feels like it's there, and like we're just killing time until we get to the first big turning point of the story, and and you know, obviously costumes and stuff like that. All the production stuff, apart from the CGI, is great. But as far as performance goes, like as far as like Gal Gadot is concerned, since I've been calling her out, there is like the one scene where she goes to Poirot for help, and you know, it's talking about how like she asks him to like watch over them because they feel unsafe because of Jackie, and it's like that's probably her strongest scene, I guess, and it's not bad, but it leaves a lot to be desired for her playing such a major character, because you would think the other big player here would be Jackie, particularly with what we saw Mia Farrow do in the '78 movie, and how it can be a really, really juicy part, and a part that you really kind of have to toe that line where it's like, this is clearly somebody that's unhinged, but also you don't want to make it too obvious, whether, like, the lengths that they will go. And Farrah played that in a really interesting way. Here, I don't really think she gets enough to work with. I honestly feel like Jackie's barely here at all, which is not great for this story, and how it's supposed to unfold, and where exactly the intrigue with the characters comes in. So more screen time with that probably would have helped a lot, just really between the three of them, but it feels like none of the core three here that set off the whole story really leave much of an impact. And I imagine a lot of that has to do with the performances also, but because Armie Hammer can be a very reliable actor, but here I feel like everybody was kind of trying to go that, oh, all that's really needed here is our presence route, but I don't think that was going to work with this particular cast. And we're throwing in, you know, additions here to the story. We talked about the opening scene, and the way some of the other characters interact here. Like we're bringing in Tom Bateman from the first movie and his mother Annette Bening, and they're here, and then they make Mrs. Otterborn a bit more prominent in Poirot's portion of the story. And the thing about that is that, like I was saying, Death on the Nile is already a story that kind of takes a while. So these additions really aren't helping, like on a pacing level. It's like I said, it is nice if you want to focus more on character, but it's still, even when they are focusing on character, it's not really that interesting what they're adding. Even if you know, bring in these great actors, Oscar-nominated actors like Sofia Coppola is the one that's playing Mrs. Otterborn, but it's, and you've got Jennifer Saunders and Dawn French in here as Vince Schuyler and Bowers, and it's, you would think the teaming of them again would be like, oh, this is going to be so natural because they've worked together so many times before, and it's like this iconic duo and all that, and they'll be really showy. But even then, I think that's when you really get the vibe of the characters don't feel like they're getting as much of a focus as they probably should be. Because another person is Russell Brand, who's very interestingly cast. First of all, the short hair on him is very jarring, especially since he gets to keep his beard. But the fact that he is playing a character that's so downplayed, like he gets the scene in the freezer that's really good, where he kind of gets to heighten this performance a little bit. But it's interesting to see him play downplayed, because I've always felt like, despite how you see his personality and the way that he actually is, and you associate it with like one sort of personality, he's shown that he can be a pretty effective actor. Like there's scenes in Get Into the Greek that kind of go a bit more down the dramatic route that he's really, really good in. So him like actually taking on a completely serious part here is very interesting, and it's something I'd like to see him do more of, because I feel like he could really show it off, but once again, like everybody else, the movie just doesn't really give him the screen time enough to really, you know, show that and really show what you can do with the character, because a lot of these people really only have, like, they're either saddled with one of two jobs or both, which is you either, you know, like, just observe and you say maybe something snarky about the situation or one of the other characters, or you just, like, loom sinisterly so that you can be a red herring, and that's pretty much the only jobs that these people are given. So, and despite the long intro to introduce all the characters, it still doesn't give you enough of the characters themselves for them to feel like any other piece of this puzzle apart from, well, maybe they did it or maybe they didn't. And that's really it. Like, you don't really have too much to grasp onto and wonder about and, like, analyze if you're not already familiar with which direction the story's going. Because that's another thing also, is the idea of seeing a story, you know, remade again and again. It's interesting to see it through another director's perspective, always, I think. But as far as, like, a mystery like this, where a whole portion of the story, the whole thing, appeal of it, is trying to piece the puzzle pieces together yourself. And when you already know which direction it's going and what the main clues are and all that stuff, it does kind of have a whole other task on its hand for the people that know the story, to still make it interesting enough, which I imagine is a lot of where the, like, changes in the additions to the story would come in, where it's like, we got to change it up a little bit. Because while a lot of our audience will not know where this story is going, a lot of our audience also will. And so it's like kind of trying to find the middle ground to appease both of those audiences. And I don't know how much it would do for either, because I'm not sure. I couldn't quite put myself in the mind of somebody that would watch this version without knowing what the mystery is, but it feels so, like, if it would feel more, you know, enticing if you don't know where it's going, maybe. Because it's like we were saying, the most you can do is just try to dress it up more, and even then, the fact that a lot of the dressing is this really shoddy CGI, and these, you know, and the actors at the center not being the most charismatic in this sense. They may have before, but really not here. It's... yeah, the whole thing just kind of leaves a lot to be desired. So that's, like I was saying, since Death on the Nile is a story that kind of requires performance just as much as, you know, the backgrounds and the settings and all that, that you would think, especially with the director as great and thorough as Branagh, but it just feels like it's lacking. Like there's a lot of missing to it or something, to where it's not as gripping as it could have been. Because you go, even, you know, because I remember liking his Murder on the Orient Express back in 2017, even though I knew where that was going. But I don't feel like this one has the same kind of effect as that did, but yeah, it's still fun to see him play the character and see, you know, what exactly his vision's going to be for it. And some of those additions are interesting. Like I said, the idea of kind of focusing more on his character from a backstory stance seems like it might just be sort of overkill, but it's fine as far as, you know, his portrayal of Poirot goes and seeing the backstory and all that stuff. But everything else, it's like you can see all the makings of what would have made this great, but they're just kind of, they showed up, but they didn't really do much of the work in regards to, you know, getting performances and setting that looks at least somewhat legitimate, but that's what it is. So it just kind of lands in the middle for me, I think. But like I said, if he wants to keep doing his Poirot thing, I would very much encourage that. I would like to see what else he would do with it, but I have no idea if there's any plans on that or not. So we'll go on to the next movie, which is Marry Me, which is a movie that I basically assumed, of course, because a lot of the times on movies like this, you can pretty much assume, you know, if it's going to be shit or not, or if it's going to be, you know, exactly the same thing that we've seen a bunch of times before. And it's one of those movies asking you, like, what even year is it? Like, this movies like this came out and were really successful, like, 20 years ago, if not longer. Like, I feel like Notting Hill comparisons are going to be inevitable. Particularly, like, it feels like an age-old concept, but Notting Hill specifically, where he's like the normal dude and she's like the really famous person, and they just sort of meet by chance, and it in one sense it seems like a ridiculous romantic comedy setup, but then another instance, there are quite a few people in show business that have married people that are like not in show business, that were just like normal people at the time, or relatively normal people at the time. Like, it does happen. Like, Matt Damon's wife, you know, is one of the first that comes to mind. But going into it as a movie that seems like it's not quite in the year it's supposed to be, it's it was very interesting to me to learn that it's based on apparently graphic novels that started as a webcomic. It's a really weird story to how we got to this movie. That's a movie like this coming out in 2022. It's this weird math equation. So by all accounts, this should have been a disaster, and it should have been it if not another romantic comedy, just cliche romantic comedy that just comes and goes. It could have left a really big impact as something astonishingly bad, and it's surprisingly good, and I don't know how I feel about that. So we're gonna work through that now. Um, First off, I was noticing a lot about because as soon as a romantic comedy starts, you can just start counting the cliches immediately. Like as soon as like the first song hits and the first credit comes up, you're already like clocking the cliches in any romantic comedy ever. So when this started, and we see what Jennifer Lopez is doing, and it's all that, and she's essentially playing herself. I mean, usually I feel like it's a cop out to say that, but I mean, she really is pretty much playing herself. And then we meet, normal dude Owen Wilson, who is a single dad with a daughter. And when you see the single dad, and you see him interacting with his daughter, immediately one of the first cliches that you're going to spot is really, really obvious exposition that the writer didn't even remotely try to put in subtly. It'll just be like they just explain their lives to each other. And that doesn't happen really at all. When they interact, when he and his daughter interact, it's quite natural, and they're not really like desperately trying to catch us up on their lives. They're just kind of living and doing their thing. They kind of set up like where the daughter is in school right now, but that's really about it. So that immediately was really surprising, and how it focuses more on their relationship rather than why he's single. And it's because they do bring up like they're just divorced and apart, and she's got an ex, or he his ex has a boyfriend that is apparently much more fun than he is, and that's pretty much about it. We see the mom like once in a montage, and it's like an exchanging of her, and it's like that's the only importance the mom has in this story, and it's like you would think like, oh, that's why are they throwing away that character, but it's like, yeah, the movie knows we don't need that character. That character has nothing to do with this movie or this story at all. And so it's like to only see her like once in passing in a montage actually makes sense for like trimming the fat off of a movie like this, because it's not needed. And I love that the movie knew that, and we don't have to deal with that shit. And it's like there's no conflict there. It's just they're divorced, she has somebody else, and they share the daughter. That's it. That's all we need to know about her. So we can focus all of what he's doing in the present now, instead of just bombarding us with exposition about the past and bringing in convoluted subplots. It's really nice. It's such a breath of fresh air. And the cliches are still going to be here, like the fact that he's one of those movie characters that he's a teacher, so clearly he must have a teacher's salary, but he's in a pretty nice apartment in the city. It is one of those, but apart from that, the thing that still makes it work, I think, and like you immediately see that and you think like, how would this character ever be relatable as this normal dude? But Owen Wilson kind of specializes in just kind of being the normal dude, because because you would think once he's with the super famous person that it would be like the connection between them would be too forced. Like you could see a script working all of its gears and stuff like that to make sure that you like them together, even though they don't have to do anything themselves. You basically have to feel that way because the script wants you to, and we have to get from point A to point B. But no, it's actually surprisingly natural. How much they like connect and how like genuine it actually feels, and how it does kind of feel like progressive. Where at first it's really awkward. There's a lot of silences. And then when they start to like each other, which does happen pretty early, you just kind of believe it. Like it's like their personalities just kind of work together like that, despite the different places they're coming from. And we do get that sense that she's at a level of fame to where she might as well be on another planet. And we do look into like the celebrity stuff like that, and then like getting moments where they have to deal with paparazzi, and he's getting like they're like screaming orders at him while they're taking pictures of him, and he's just like, why are you yelling at me? I'm it's like, and if you've seen any of the paparazzi stuff and how just dreadful those people are, stuff like that is actually really funny. The way they just kind of show the absurdity of celebrity in a way. And it's like it does go to corny places a bit, where there's this whole middle portion where it's like they're talking about how she's, you know, obsessed with her image and how she's basically a product, and, you know, the social media and all that, and he's not. He's completely off the grid, and so it's like they make this pact that she'll go completely off social media and he'll get on it. And it's like stuff like that might seem a little corny, and it basically is. But it's not like this major point or anything. It's just something that they kind of do to sort of get to know each other better and see where they're coming from in the middle. And that's the thing, too, is for a while I had a problem with this movie. And it wasn't until in retrospect that I realized that it's not the movie's fault at all, because the movie was a victim of its genre, in the sense that when you watch a really cliche romantic comedy, you know that the conflict is coming. And it feels like everything is pointless because you know exactly where it's going to go. You know, this is about the point where the conflict happens, and then all the characters go away and sulk. There's probably misunderstandings that are really forced and stupid and could easily be solved with one word being said. Instead, they just part ways and get all mad, and we just have to wait for it to end so that they can get back together and the movie can end. And so, while I was watching this, and like the more their relationship got better and better, and the chemistry got better and better, I was starting to feel like, well, obviously this isn't going to be perfect. Like, it's obviously too perfect. We know the conflict's coming, and I just kind of found myself waiting for the conflict. And the movie goes for a while. It goes past the usual mark where the conflict would come in. Like, there's maybe like 20 minutes of the movie left when there's a conflict kind of comes in. And it's a point that could be seen as inevitable, where it's like we don't really go the contrived route, but it's like it was so interesting to me how and this might sound, you know, if you're looking into screenwriting 101 or something, this might sound like a problem, but I mean, if you want a breath of fresh air, especially in a genre like this is a good thing. It feels like there's barely a conflict in it at all. Like when the conflict finally comes up, it's the way it's handled by them especially is so like there isn't that moment where like one of them gets mad at the other. It's just more like one of them feels like he's coming to terms with the situation, and then it's like, so I see this for what it is, and it's almost like he's trying to be almost like a realist about the whole thing, and that ends up being what the conflict is. But it's like they never really get mad at each other. They barely part ways. I mean, we do eventually get to a point where somebody has to run through an airport towards the end, but not really in the way that you think. Where like it's like, you know, it's a romantic comedy and a character runs through the airport at the end. Just sounds like, well, yeah, I know that scene before, but it's really just a transition to another better scene. Is all that is. So it's like I said, it had all the makings to just be this really, you can just count all the cliches and all the beats to it all the way to the end kind of thing. But this movie, it's the relaxed nature of this movie, I feel like it's not trying to be too, like, give the characters too many problems, because it's got an interesting setup as it is here that wouldn't probably be that interesting. Number one, because we've already seen another movie, but also because the characters just go so well together, which normally might be one of the big problems, and yeah, and it's like it's interesting how far it can go for a movie's quality if it just avoids bullshit. Like, if it just avoids contrivances and stuff like that, and forced conflict or forced subplots or anything like that. It just kind of is, and that makes it really work in a way that I was not expecting at all. And yeah, it can be quite romantic consistently, so it's got all those things going for it. So I kind of can't believe how much I actually like this, and the end credits are really nice too. And we have some nice supporting players in here also, like Sarah Silverman and stuff like that as the go-to friend character. But even that is like, you know, it's a cliche, but it's here and serves its purpose enough that it just doesn't really, I don't really mind one way or the other. It's just part of the story, and yeah, that was so the whole thing is very surprising. So I really appreciate when movies like that can take these setups or take a genre in itself and just say, well, here's another way to do this. Here's like if you've ever watched a romantic comedy and just been like pissed off and fuming the whole time, this one avoids a lot of the shit that would make you feel that way. So yeah, that's nice. So let's go back to average territory with Blacklight, the new Liam Neeson action movie, which I feel like I've lost track of these at this point. You could almost say he's getting into Nicolas Cage territory. At least most of his movies are still coming to theaters. But it is one of those cases where, like Cage, he's got a lot of these coming out to the point that you're probably losing track of them at this point. I think he's had at least a couple between Cold Pursuit and this that I missed completely because they just kind of came and went, and I didn't really hear anything about them one way or the other. But when you look at these, it's like there's some good and there's many that aren't, but yet they're just fun enough to keep you coming back every time he has a new movie like this. Is where I feel like he can relate to Cage in a way. But yeah, so as it starts, we're introduced to a character that's like this. It's a woman. I think she's trying to run for Congress, and it seems like she's got a lot of really promising plans. And then she is killed by the quietest, most ninja-like speeding truck in the history of the world. And it's trying to be this sort of... I mean, it sets up like it's going to be some political espionage kind of thing, but it never really has the vibe of that from then on. That's just kind of the jumping off point. Because now we have Liam Neeson's character, who is this FBI guy that has an interesting job, that is an interesting setup for the protagonist of a movie, and it is where he's in the FBI, and we've got these undercovers that have been in their operations for, like, you know, years, and they're starting to get in over their head and lose their minds, and it's like their cover is going to be blown to that's how close they are to the breaking point. And so he's the guy that comes in and kind of gets them out of those situations. And that's a really cool idea to set up a movie with a protagonist that has this job. But then, of course, he gets caught up in this very bland plot with these very bland characters, with very bland action, and that's just what the movie is. So it's really just going to rely on what Neeson can do with this material, which he could do in his sleep, but still do well. So that's basically what the movie has going for it. As far as it being an action movie that feels kind of low on the budget, and sort of almost direct to video like it feels like he's getting. I was just praising him because like, hey, your movies are at least still in theaters. It does feel like Blacklight might be kind of like a lead into we're getting closer and closer to straight to video territory with Liam Neeson, unfortunately. But it isn't like, once again, like we were talking about with Marry Me, sometimes the bar is just so low. But where Marry Me did actually much exceed what it was doing, despite the bar being low, this one takes advantage of the bar being low in the sense that it doesn't have, like, Taken 3 editing, which is what you expect out of a movie that's borderline straight-to-video. So when we get a couple of car chases in this, they're not that bad. They're relatively competently done, which is kind of surprising for a movie that looks like this, essentially, for lack of a better way to put it. And it's like, it's only really when we get later into it that the editing starts to get really dumb, and it's like flashes of light go into the camera when we're cutting around to show how dramatic it is and stuff like that. But in the meantime, like, these car chases and stuff like that aren't bad. Like, we do have those moments where they're done just well enough and you can see well enough that, like, when a close call happens, it, like, you know, it registers with you, like, you might, you know, recoil a little bit. And that's nice that they were able to all that off. But at the same time, even though they aren't shitty action sequences and they don't have really, really shitty editing the way we've seen a lot of movies have, whether it be straight-to-video movies or Taken 3 or something, they're still relatively bland. Like, they're bland, but they're not the worst. Like, that's kind of where the bar is for this whole movie. At least it's not this stuff, but it could have been this stuff, and it's certainly not this stuff. When you're talking about like the better parts of this stuff and the better movies that Liam Neeson's put out in this action territory, like Cold Pursuit and the first Taken, obviously. But it is also another one of those cases where you can see the hand-to-hand fights. The car chases are okay. The hand-to-hand fights, you can tell that they were kind of skimping on choreography. Like they're barely choreographed at all. The punches that are being thrown and the kicks that are being thrown are barely... They're very impotent, I guess you could say. So there is some of that. But like I was saying, it really is just what Nathan's bringing here that can help. And we do get to see two different sides of this character. We get to see the hardcore guy. It's like, the one-man army that we know he can do well. But then there's also these scenes with his family where he's dealing with his adult daughter and then his granddaughter. And these scenes are light in a nice way, if in a bit of an obvious way, in kind of ways we've seen before. He's the kind of grandpa. It's basically if we're talking about Cage, like the big daddy hit girl relationship from Kick-Ass, where it's like in Blacklight, Liam Neeson's granddaughter has a birthday, and she's still a very small child, and she's at this child's birthday party, her own, and one of her gifts from him is a taser. Like it's one of those things. But it like sets up that the granddaughter's like actually genuinely really into this kind of thing, which is why it gave me the Big Daddy hit girl vibes a little bit. Not that it goes down that path. She's much even younger than Chloe Moretz was in that. So it doesn't go down that territory. It's an innocent grandma-granddaughter relationship. Like it even gets to the point where when he's talking to her, sometimes you can hear his good cop voice from the Lego movie, which is really funny to see actually come out of him rather than an animated character. And sometimes there's just these little touches that are just funny, and I'm not even sure they're even supposed to be. I can't tell. Where it's like, there's the reporter in this movie that's trying to figure out everything that's going on, and he's talking to her in secrecy. And of course he's got to be super ominous about it, because everything's so dangerous and she could be killed at any minute because she's unfolding the story. And she's holding her dog while he's talking to her, and he gets like really in deep Liam Neeson voice, and he's like being dead serious, like, don't play the hero, and it's like, you will get killed, and it's like, this is a very serious matter. And then he like pets her dog's head before he walks away. And it's like moments like that where I don't know if they're supposed to be like as light as they feel or as out of place as they feel in this very funny way. But it's actually kind of appreciated, because it does almost kind of show a lot of movies like this, one of their main problems is that they take themselves too seriously, and the more serious they take themselves, the dopier they start to look. So moments like that where he pets the dog's head actually help, I think. So that's great. But obviously we're going to meet some different characters. We've got a lot of what feels like low-budget actors. I think the reporter, I briefly looked her up, she's like from Broadway or something, but everybody else kind of has this sort of straight-to-video look to them, like no names you would recognize, except for Aidan Quinn as the like head of the department that he works in. And as far as like, where the story goes and stuff like that, it's like we've got this character that is the head of the department, but also like Liam Neeson's best friend. So it's like he's the boss, but he's also the best friend, and he's played by the only other recognizable actor in the movie. And if you can't put those pieces together, this story might rivet you, maybe. if you can't put the pieces together, what Aidan Quinn's purpose is in this movie. So, yeah, apart from that, like I said, very bland characters from these very low-budget actors. The stakes are high for these characters, but you're never going to care. If anything, you're just going to count the seconds until they get off, because that's how the story's going to move forward, I guess. So, and yes, it does get to a point where, when, like, Taken started really taking off, a lot of people were saying that Liam Neeson could be the new Harrison Ford. Which is something that he has carried on pretty well. But there was also like that old joke where a lot of Harrison Ford's movies are him going from place to place yelling, "Where's my family? Give me back my family." Yep. Blacklight is a movie where Liam Neeson runs around for a large portion of the second half, just asking where his family is, and to give his family back to him. So this is where we are in the creativity meter. It's all about, you know, what Neeson himself is bringing, and what his, you know, charisma and how he can handle the genre physically can bring to this. Because they're kind of trying to add, you know, politics into it a little bit. This is very ineffectively use like current politics in a way that's not so shrouded, but that's one of those cases where you can feel like it's almost like they were trying to make the movie a little more than it is, but it's not. It's what it is. But at the same time, this could have been an absolute piece of shit. But it's really nothing to get mad over, even. Because, like, you know, the bad action movies that are out there can be infuriating. But that's the question that always comes up with movies like this, that are this bland and this middle of the road, where it's like, I didn't get mad at it, but it's like, is that worse than getting mad at it? Because at least it did something to put some passion into you. And this isn't going to be that movie, but I don't know how much this wants to be that movie. Like I said, sometimes it really takes itself seriously, like, with the injection of politics into it, but then the other side is, you know, him petting the dog's head and stuff like that. I don't know where it is. And the granddaughter scenes where she gets a taser for her birthday and she's like 6 or something. So I don't know. But I didn't hate it or anything, and for right now, that's good enough for me. So I think that's where I'll leave that. So pretty much right after this, I think we're going to talk about Jackass Forever and Moonfall. And then we will go into the actual new releases of Uncharted and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the new one. And I'm also going to talk about that Soderbergh thing that's on HBO Max. So all that's going to be what the new stuff is. So yeah, and then we'll keep going with all the stuff we've been doing, award stuff and stuff like that. There's going to be an Emily Blunt video on the 23rd that I've already shot, so that'll be ready to go, and that'll be that. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.